The lights at the shelter were shutting down when Officer Connor Maddox stopped in front of a cage no one wanted. Inside, a massive gray dog crouched like a shadow punched into the floor, covered in scars that looked older than its bones. No tail wag, no trust, not even fear. Just a creature waiting to be heard again. Weeks later, that same untrainable monster would sniff out a blood-stained warehouse and uncover crimes no human dared to speak of. If you're ready for a story where a broken cop and a broken dog rebuild each other, hit subscribe, stay with us. You'll want to see how a scar turns into a badge. A quiet winter rain clung to the shelter windows, blurring the world outside like an old memory refusing to leave. The city shelter smelled faintly of wet fur and metal, the kind of scent that reminded Officer Connor Maddox of long nights in empty rooms. He stood by the entrance, still in his Navy K9 jacket, the fabric darkened by weather and years of duty. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a lean figure shaped more by long shifts than exercise, he looked like a man who had learned to live with silence. His short brown hair was damp, his clean-shaven jaw tight, as if holding back something he never named. People whispered greetings. He responded with polite nods. A man practiced in understatement. Maddox wasn't here for a pet. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that he understood what it meant to arrive somewhere with nothing and wait to be sent away again. Rows of cages lined the walls like forgotten stories. Families and couples picked through them the way people choose furniture, looking for the right shape, the right look, something easy, something pretty. Puppies with soft coats and eager tails left first, cradled out the door like promises. "That one's cute," someone said. "That one looks friendly." Maddox watched quietly, hands in his pockets, rainwater dripping from his sleeves to the concrete floor. The world always seemed generous to those who already had enough of it. Then he heard a low growl, soft, hoarse, tired more than angry. In the far corner, chained in heavier steel than the others, sat a large gray-black dog, fur matted, streaked with scars across its shoulders and spine. It did not bark. It did not approach the door. It pressed itself against the wall as though the wall could protect it from memories. The animal's ribs lifted with guarded breaths, but its body was built like a survivor, strong the way a storm-battered tree remains standing simply because it refused to fall. A shelter worker stepped close to Maddox, voice lowered, as if the dog might shatter if spoken about too loudly. She wore a white coat, tired yet composed. "That one's trouble," she said, adjusting the strap of a medical bag across her shoulder. "Forced training, violent handlers. He doesn't trust anyone, doesn't know how, attacks when he's scared." She wasn't cruel, just resigned, like someone who'd seen too many broken things left behind. Maddox didn't step closer. He didn't stretch out a hand. He simply stood there, his boots planted on the cold floor, watching the creature that refused to hope anymore. A long moment passed. Rain tapped the windows. The dog lifted its head, not toward him, but toward the sound of the rain, as if remembering something painful. Maddox saw himself there, years ago, a boy who knew better than to expect kindness. A boy who learned to stay quiet so people wouldn't change their minds about keeping him. He spoke softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "No one's us asked what he survived, just what he's good for." The worker shrugged. "You can't fix what doesn't trust you." Maddox nodded slowly and signed the adoption papers. He didn't do it because the dog needed him. He did it because something in him needed a reason to stay. A quiet wind dragged across the windows, making the glass hum like a low voice in the dark. Connor Maddox brought the dog home after dusk, his boots leaving faint prints on the damp pavement outside. His small house stood on a silent street, one of those places where neighbors keep curtains drawn and mind their own nights. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and coffee that had gone cold on the counter. Maddox set down a metal bowl of water, another filled with dry food, then stepped aside. The big gray-black dog, Rogue, stayed pressed behind a heavy cabinet, muscles locked tight, scars shifting with every shallow breath. Maddox didn't push him out. He knew the look of someone who had been punished for moving, punished for wanting anything at all. He removed his Navy K9 jacket, folded it carefully over the back of a chair, and sat on the floor nearby, as if saying, "We share the same room, nothing more." Silence filled the space between them, the kind that knows how to sit still. Hours passed, the evening grew long and heavy, and Maddox drifted into sleep in his chair. The house stayed dark except for a street lamp leaking pale yellow through the blinds. He woke to a violent sound, Rogue thrashing against the cabinet, jaw clenched, a strangled cry tearing through the room. It wasn't barking, it was fear remembering itself. The dog rammed its skull against the wood as though running from a hand that no longer existed. Maddox stood, not too close, not too fast. He spoke with the cautious tone of a man who had calmed his own nightmares, not with force, but patience. "There's no one here to hurt you," he murmured, voice low, steady. "No whips, no fists. No one leaves you behind here." Rogue froze, trembling like a wounded branch in a storm. His frame shifted slowly from panic to stillness. Not trust, just exhaustion. Maddox eased down to the floor, staying a safe distance, letting the shadows settle. The dog fell quiet, breath ragged but slowing, as if unsure whether rest was allowed. The night, too, seemed to listen. When Rogue finally lay down, his back stayed turned, as though protection depended on facing the wall. Maddox rested his hands on the floor beside him, palms open, exposed. The house returned to its soft hum, the refrigerator clicking, the wind brushing the window pane, Rogue's breathing deepening inch by inch. Maddox watched, remembering cold beds in foster homes. Nights he stayed awake so no one could surprise him in the dark. He whispered not to the animal, but to a memory they shared without ever speaking. "You're safe here, even if it takes time to believe it." Rogue didn't respond, but his trembling eased. And in that small, unspoken surrender, something changed. Not trust, not yet, but the permission to sleep without fear. Morning arrived slowly, a pale light slipping through the blinds like a cautious visitor. Connor Maddox stood in the hallway, already dressed in his Navy K9 uniform, the fabric still stiff from last night's rain. The badge caught the morning glow, a small flash of metal against an otherwise quiet room. Rogue sat near the wall, body lowered but alert, his gray-black fur shifting with each tense breath. When the dog saw the belt, radio, gun, heavy boots, it began to growl, low and ragged, the kind that came not from anger, but memory. Maddox felt the sound in his chest, like an old bruise someone pressed too hard on. He knew this fear. He knew what it meant to see danger in the shape of an authority meant to protect. The dog backed away, not toward escape, but into shadow, like a soldier unsure where the next strike would come from. A lesser man might have scolded or tried to prove control. Instead, Maddox unbuckled his belt and set it aside. The gun came off next, then the radio. Finally, the coat. He placed them on the floor one by one, without hurry, as if undressing a wound. Now in a faded gray t-shirt, jeans, and soft-soled shoes, he sat on the hardwood floor with the quiet patience of someone who had learned that trust cannot be ordered. Rogue stopped growling, though his sides rose sharply with each unsettled breath. Maddox didn't speak, didn't call him over. He simply sat, letting the moment breathe. A long silence shaped the room. The difference between a uniform and a man became something the dog could feel rather than understand. Minutes crawled by, unremarkable to anyone else, but life-changing to those who have lived without safety. Rogue's breathing shifted, the harshness fading into heavy, uncertain exhales. Slowly, dragged by hunger more than faith, the dog stepped toward the bowl of food. This time, Maddox stayed in the room. He didn't look directly, just listened to the crunch of kibble, a fragile sound of surrender. Rogue ate in short bursts, pausing whenever the floor creaked, half expecting pain to come flying out of nowhere. But nothing happened. Nothing hurt. Maddox leaned back against the wall, letting his shoulders sink into the wood as if he were setting something down too. They were two survivors in the same quiet house, both learning that fear does not leave. It merely loosens its grip when someone chooses not to tighten theirs. The morning sun brightened through the window, softening the edges of everything. Rogue lifted his head, no longer growling, only breathing. Maddox whispered, barely audible, as if speaking to a child who had learned to flinch before listening. "Whatever they taught you, it's over now." The dog didn't come closer, but it didn't retreat either. And in that stillness, trust began. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small agreement between two beings who had finally stopped expecting harm. Night settled over the town like a layer of dust, thin and quiet, carried by a chill wind. Connor Maddox walked the sidewalk with Rogue at his side, the leash kept short, not out of control, but out of respect for the dog's fear. Street lamps glowed weakly, painting long shadows that crawled across brick walls and shuttered shops. Rogue hesitated often, flinching at slamming car doors, stiffening when a motorcycle passed, shrinking from voices echoing down alleyways. Maddox slowed his pace, letting the dog breathe between steps. A man who knew pain understands that healing moves at a different speed. Leaves scratched across the pavement like whispers from another time. Then, without warning, Rogue stopped. His muscles tightened, fur bristling along his spine. He didn't cower. He leaned forward. His body no longer spoke of fear, but of recognition. They stood before an abandoned warehouse at the edge of a fenced-off industrial zone, marked with faded warnings. No entry. Rogue's growl was not frantic this time, but focused, vibrating through his chest like a secret being remembered. His nose lifted, catching something hidden behind metal walls, something thick, metallic, familiar in a terrible way. Maddox felt the leash pull, not in panic but insistence. He called the station. Within minutes, a convoy of dark SUVs rolled in. Captain Blake Rowan stepped out, a tall man in his 50s with gray-combed hair and a heavy Navy captain's coat. His voice carried calm authority, the kind carved by years of choices that left scars no badge could hide. "Maddox," he said quietly, "what have you got?" SWAT breached the doors with blunt force. The warehouse swallowed them in darkness, then burst open with shouts and flashes of cold light. Crates lined the walls, stuffed with illegal weapons. On the floor, a stain, fresh, wet, red, streaked across concrete. It wasn't just storage. Something violent had happened recently. A name surfaced, like a bruise pressed too hard. Marcus Clay. Maddox didn't speak it aloud. He didn't need to. The metallic scent in the air filled Rogue with an unmistakable tremor. Blood was not new to him. It was history. Officer Ethan Cross arrived shortly after, jacket crisp, boots clean, carrying the confidence of someone who trusted skill more than patience. He looked at Rogue, smirk tugging lightly at his mouth. "A scared mutt solved the case? Must be luck." His voice had the casual sting of someone who never felt small in a room. Rowan didn't return the smile. He studied Rogue the way a doctor studies an X-ray. "Luck doesn't smell blood across a parking lot," he said. "This dog has seen things things no animal should see. Rogue stood still, not proud, not bold, simply present. Maddox felt the truth settle like frost in his lungs. Rogue wasn't afraid of violence. He feared returning to it. As the warehouse door shut behind officers and evidence, Maddox rested a hand near Rogue, not touching, just near enough. "You're not going back there," he whispered, too soft for the others to hear. Rogue didn't pull away. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of metal away, letting the night breathe again. Morning light filtered through the training yard, pale and cold, like breath on frosted glass. Connor Maddox stood beside Rogue, holding a short lead, trying to look steady even though his own pulse betrayed him. Captain Blake Rowan watched from the fence line, arms folded over his navy coat, jaw set in quiet warning. Beside him, Ethan Cross leaned back with a skeptic's smirk, as though already waiting for failure. Maddox knew the risk. If Rogue reacted violently, he would lose more than a partner. He might lose the badge that kept him from drifting back into the empty places of his childhood. Rogue, too, seemed to understand something was at stake. The dog's shoulders were tense, tail low but not tucked, as if he were bracing for an unseen blow. The first test began with command drills, simple, careful instructions spoken firmly and without threat. Rogue hesitated at each word, not out of defiance, but a learned fear of choosing wrong. Maddox knelt, kept his voice steady, and repeated a single cue: "Stay." Rogue obeyed, body shaking as though his muscles remembered punishment more clearly than praise. The second test involved scent tracking, following a trail through a maze of crates. Other dogs bounded forward eagerly, thrilled by the chase. Rogue moved like someone walking into a memory he wished he could forget, yet he followed the scent perfectly, nose low, gait heavy with a past he did not choose. When he returned with the hidden item, Maddox didn't cheer, didn't praise too loudly. He only whispered, "Good," as though speaking too loudly might break something fragile that had just begun to mend. Then came the simulated gunfire. A loud crack split the air. Rogue flinched violently, legs locking, head ducking, pupils wide enough to drown in. He did not run. His whole body trembled, but he stayed. Tears welled at the corners of his eyes, something rare and raw in an animal. His chest rose and fell too fast, like he was trying to outbreathe the past. Maddox swallowed hard, fighting the urge to hold him. That kind of comfort too soon could be mistaken for threat. Rowan watched closely, face unreadable. Ethan muttered, "He's breaking." But Rowan shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "He's trying." Rogue endured 2 more shots. His body stayed rooted, a creature battling an invisible war. Maddox understood then that courage was not loud. It did not bark or bite or stand tall. Sometimes it shook, sometimes it cried, sometimes it stayed when every memory begged it to flee. After the 3rd shot, Rogue looked up at Maddox, not trusting, not confident, but willing. Maddox lowered his voice to a promise meant for only one listener. "We do this together," he murmured. Rogue didn't move toward him, but he stopped shaking, and that was enough. Rain hammered the asphalt like a restless drum, steady and merciless over the training grounds. Connor Maddox stood with Rogue beside the search crew, rain slipping from the brim of his navy cap, soaking his sleeves. Rogue shook beneath the weather, not from cold, but from the low growl of thunder rolling above. Captain Blake Rowan read the assignment in a calm voice, as if the storm were only an inconvenience. 7-year-old Mason Cole, lost near the park woods, hypothermia risk. The crew members shifted uneasily, knowing this was no drill. At the edge of the formation, Officer Ethan Cross muttered under his breath, "Perfect, let the trembling mutt lead us into a storm." Maddox said nothing, though something old and metallic settled in his chest. Pressure like a memory of failure. A soaked jacket, small as a folded towel, lay on a table beneath a tarp. Rogue sniffed it once. Too fast, almost confused, as though the scent carried a story he didn't want to remember. Maddox crouched beside him, ignoring the cold water running down his collar, and steadied the dog's trembling flank with one hand. "You just have to follow him," he whispered, not loud enough for anyone else to hear. Rogue lowered his head again, and I inhaled deeply. Longer this time. A low whine escaped him, not fear, but recognition. He surged forward, pulling the leash taut, nose skimming the ground through puddles and mud. The crew followed, boots sinking, breath turning white in the rising wind. Inside the woods, branches snapped under the storm's weight. Rogue paused whenever thunder cracked, shuddering as if struck by an invisible hand. But each time he stopped, Maddox stood beside him, never pulling, never ordering, only waiting. In a break between thunder, Maddox placed his palm gently on Rogue's head, solid and warm despite the storm. "No one's going to hurt you anymore," he murmured. Rogue's breathing steadied. He pressed forward. Minutes stretched into a slow ache of worry. Cold rain drenched them until the world blurred into silver and shadows. Then, near a swollen creek, Rogue stiffened. He began digging into the riverbank soil, barking with a sharp, frightened urgency. Maddox dropped to his knees, clawing at the mud alongside him. Under a slick blanket of leaves, they uncovered a small body, blue-lipped, unconscious, but breathing. Maddox wrapped the child in his jacket. Rogue hovered close, whining low, nudging the child's shoe, then looking up at Maddox as if asking whether this counted as saving. Maddox whispered, "You did it," not as praise, but as truth. Rogue leaned against him, not proudly, not confidently, but like someone who was finally allowed to exist without fear. Morning light drifted through the blinds in quiet stripes, pale and dusty like calm breath after a long night. A week had passed since Rogue found Mason. The storm was gone, but its echo lingered in every whispered conversation at the precinct. Today was evaluation day, an official panel, cold and procedural, ready to lift or crush years of training. Rogue sat beside Connor Maddox, heavy gray fur still damp from a bath he barely tolerated. He looked cleaner, though the scars remained like faded handwriting on his body. In the front row, 3 evaluators sat behind folding tables, clipboards, pens, and paperwork stacked like judgment. Maddox stood straight, uniform pressed, water stains still clinging faintly to his boots from that rainy night. Rogue sniffed the air, uneasy. The room wasn't hostile, but it reminded him of places where metal bars and raised hands meant pain. One evaluator, a thin man with sharp speech, began first. "He's unstable, severe reaction to loud sound, emotional triggers we cannot control." His voice felt like a gavel. Another, a woman with gray hair tied neatly, opened a file. "However, his scent tracking is irregularly strong. The detail is unprecedented." Her tone softened slightly, like someone speaking to something fragile but valuable. A third evaluator leaned back, undecided. "Useful, but dangerous," he muttered. Captain Blake Rowan rose slowly from the side bench. Tall, composed, coat buttoned even indoors. He had the manner of someone who has already buried too many regrets. "A K9 doesn't need to be perfect," he said quietly. He wasn't defending Rogue. He was stating a truth the room forgot. He needs loyalty, and he must not quit. Rogue tracked a child in a storm. He stayed when fear told him to run. The room fell silent for a long, respectful moment. Fear is easy. Staying is not. Rowan turned toward Maddox. "Your dog doesn't fight. He endures." Then he faced the evaluators again. "We won't train him to bite, only to find. Abused tools become terrible weapons, but if given a different purpose, they can save lives." Maddox felt a tightening in his chest, not pride, but a gentle ache of recognition. Someone was finally choosing what he himself once wished someone had chosen in him. When the signatures were done, Rogue was granted clearance, K9 specialist, not for attack work, but for tracking blood scents, hidden crime traces, underground evidence no police dog was ever meant to recognize. Maddox knelt beside him, touching the side of his neck where thick fur hid old pain. Rogue pressed his weight subtly against him, not leaning for support, but acknowledging the truth written on that handler's badge. They walked out of the room together, neither victorious nor defeated, just chosen. Autumn sunlight lay warm and quiet on the town square, soft as wool on the old bricks. The ceremony was small, arranged under a white canopy fluttering gently in the breeze. Police officers stood in uniform rows, hats polished, boots cleaned, yet they seemed oddly humbled today. Connor Maddox walked up the steps with Rogue at his side. The dog did not bark, did not pose, did not react to applause. Rogue simply stood there, broad and scarred, his gray-black coat moving lightly in the wind, as if time were brushing him instead of hands. Maddox's uniform felt heavier than usual, not from medals, but from memory. Years spent learning that worth was not something earned loudly. Children gathered close, drawn by curiosity rather than fear. A little girl in a red sweater reached out first, her fingers brushing the line of raised scars on Rogue's back. Instead of pulling away, she traced them gently, as if reading a story carved into him. Soon others joined, their hands careful, their voices quiet. No one gasped at his appearance. No one recoiled. They saw something they recognized from scraped knees, stitched chins and childhood tumbles. Hurt that is healed, but never quite disappeared. Rogue stood still, tail lowered, but not tense, his breathing steady, no longer hiding himself. An older man, his face weathered by sun and years, approached Maddox with a slow step. His voice cracked like old wood. That dog. Someone must have hurt him real bad. Maddox looked at Rogue, remembering broken sleep, trembling muscle, the silent nightmares only scars can explain. Yes, he replied, but he never stopped trying to do the right thing, even when he was scared. The man nodded once, understanding in the quiet way older souls do, without more questions. A boy wearing a blue cap tugged at Maddox's sleeve. Why didn't you give him away when he was scared of everything? His voice held no judgment, only the honest wonder of childhood. Maddox knelt to be at eye level, his badge glinting faintly in the sun. Because once, someone didn't give me away either, he said softly. I was scared too, and they stayed. The child didn't answer, but he leaned against Rogue's shoulder, trusting him as easily as breathing. Rogue lowered his head beside him, as if offering that trust back. Applause returned, but this time neither Maddox nor Rogue looked toward the crowd. They looked at each other, two lives once unwanted, now quietly chosen. Maddox rested his hand on Rogue's neck, feeling warmth beneath the scars. A dog who refused to run, and a man who refused to leave. Not perfect, not fearless, just present. Sometimes that is enough to save what's still good in us. As the years pass, some scars stay, and some days feel heavy with memories we don't talk about. But listen closely. Healing doesn't always come with applause or perfection. Sometimes it arrives on four paws, sits quietly beside us, and reminds us that broken things can still protect, still serve, still love. If this story warmed a quiet part of your heart, share it with someone who has their own scars to carry. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to join our circle of stories. May grace find you as loyalty found them.